Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
Like, how do you de-risk a big decision? How do you make sure there is alignment on what you're trying to do, a landscape of choices, and a filter through which to evaluate your options?
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of.
As a CEO, how do you foster high levels of trust and engagement in your organization, despite having the discomfort and uncomfortable decisions that come with a transformation? On this episode, I'm joined by Andrew Stein. He's the president and CEO of the Children's Foundation of Michigan, and we talk about the transformation that he's leading at the organization who support kids and families across the state of Michigan. The conversation is especially meaningful for our team here because we had the opportunity to work directly with the foundation earlier this year to help them facilitate the selection of a critical new technology platform that's going to better serve their mission. We get to hear directly from Andrew how this was helpful for his team and himself, and also get to hear their firsthand perspective about the process we took and how that approach de-risked the successful outcomes that they had. We mentioned the workshop a few times, and if you're curious about how the facilitation process worked, check out the solo episode I did on April 17th, 2025, and I outlined the approach in a step-by-step. This is also the first time on the show that we're talking about a fundraiser that I'm doing to support the foundation's work. And yes, if you're watching the video and you notice that I'm missing about 10 inches of hair, it's all part of the campaign. I'm personally matching your donations, and you'll hear more about how you can contribute later in the episode. Whether the organization you're leading is in the midst of making a critical infrastructure decision or a big hire, or you're a CEO leading a transformation with a lot of discomfort, or you're a leader looking to gain insights and stories about earning more trust and engagement on your team, I think you'll find this very entertaining and also insightful. Here is my chat with Andrew Stein from the Children's Foundation of Michigan.
Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Well, this has been something I've been excited about. Thank you so much for making time. Our audience has got to hear a little bit about this specific kind of workshop that we did with your team. And it's something that, workshops and ways to arrive at resource allocation, capital allocation in the tech realm and smart ways to get there is something we talk about pretty often. And so maybe setting the context for the folks, what prompted this workshop or the tech overhaul that you were doing in the first place at the Children's Foundation?
So when I started, I looked at our expenses and thought there was an opportunity to generate some savings and be a little more efficient with our operating budget. So I started looking at all of our vendors, including our CRM system that we were using. The challenge is in year one, that was the final year of our current contract with our CRM system. And what really hit me about 10 months into the job is they came back to us with a renewal contract, and it was a double-digit increase in our contract. And we had no choice. You can't just pivot to a new CRM system because you don't like the new terms that they're giving you. You need time to do that. So I said, 2 years ago, I said to the team, we're in this new 3-year agreement. It is what it is, but we will not be putting a position where we don't have a choice 3 years from now. And what that really means is spend this next year evaluating what we're doing. And then year 2 has to be about starting to look at what our other options are, because we're going to need a whole year just to do a thoughtful migration. I then, reached out to you, maybe a year or so ago at this point. Mm-hmm. We could read the text exchange if you want, because I went back and read it and thought, yeah, I think that was about right. Like I was getting a sense, because we don't have anyone. We have a staff of 15. We don't have anyone on our team that is a tech specialist, right? We have an IT vendor that we use, but no one on our team who is tech expert, a technologist. But getting to know you, I had this sense that you might be able to help us, because one of the issues we were facing is just where do you even get started in a process like this? I think a lot of times people immediately think, well, we got to find the right vendor, right? Like we know some of the names that are out there. It's about figuring out what's the right vendor. What you helped us understand is that there's a bunch of steps before that, before you even start thinking about the vendor. And it fit with, I think, how I lead, which is maximum input, maximum unity. Like I'm happy to be criticized for getting a bunch of people around a table to talk through a big decision, so that we hear all voices and then make a decision that everyone understands the why and gets on board with. I would rather somebody challenge me on the process by which we made a decision than what the ultimate decision was. And so the way you talked about the process that you wanted to walk us through totally fit with, I think, how I lead, which is you got almost 3/4 of our staff around a table and we spent 2 full days talking about technology with a prohibition on tech even being allowed in the room. And it went over really well. And I think got us on the same page in terms of like not who the right vendor is, but what do we actually want out of our technology?
And one thing I kind of want to clarify there, I know that y'all were hit with that double-digit price increase, but also the system wasn't really working for what you wanted either. So, if the system was working perfectly and you were getting a tremendous amount of value, then maybe it wouldn't have gotten to such an urgent priority. I think you had a number of things going on with the existing system that, in addition to the cost increase, right?
Oh yeah, when I started in this role and I'm talking to all the staff, getting to know folks, I'm listening for where there's alignment and where there's misalignment. Displeasure with our current system, there was 100% alignment. Not right, like there's that I knew from day one. Just that we weren't getting from the system what we wanted. And we didn't have a choice at the time, and we felt like, yeah, we're probably paying too much, but yeah, to your point, if we were getting out of it what we needed, price would have been then the secondary consideration. So, to all get around and think, what do we want out of a system, was really, really productive. I really like that it was, me and my senior leadership team at that table, but also Gail and Diane and like the people who are actually the users. It was a very human-centered design approach. Like, let's get the people who are actually going to be in this system every day at the table, helping us decide what we want, and what we need and what's working and what's not working. And we did that in a very analog way on sticky notes. But it got us to a point where we all ended up on the same page of what are all of the things we'd like out of our technology. If it comes down to it and we've got to make a cut between, this thing or that thing, we knew the priority. So we were comfortable with, what our non-negotiables were versus, what our nice to haves were. And then I think it just unpacked that, like, this was not just about a CRM system itself. It was about how our different platforms, from finance to donor database to grant making database to communications tools, that there had to be a better way to integrate all of those functions. And we really named that. And then when we came up with an RFP and we put it out to vendors, we actually found that there were vendors that could help us on the CRM side, but also integrate our systems in a way that we could all articulate what that would look like and feel like, but had no idea that there were platforms out there that could do it for us in the way now we've realized.
Yeah, so just to synthesize some of that, you were in the situation that you kind of inherited a system that was maybe not, uh, I mean, my perspective, and not your words, mine, is what I've seen time and time again is that when you don't put this level of thought into choosing something like this, um, we have this tendency as human nature to just kind of pick the most expensive option in the room and think like, well, they've got to be able to solve it. How else can they be this expensive or, this kind of a market leader? And there's, I think, a lot of reasons why, pricing is a whole other kind of black magic in the software world. And it's a very risky assumption that we are prone to making, thinking that, hey, the most expensive product is the best one, let alone the best one for us and what we need to use. So I think getting all those folks in the room, I'm really pleased that there was no hesitation on yours and your head of strategy's part around taking everyone offline for that whole day to think through these things. So like I see now that there was that kind of philosophical alignment that we already had. And then getting those voices in the room, it seemed very obvious that folks were very engaged and wanting to be part of the solution, despite having to, at the end of the workshop, have an extra day's work and go back and work in a system they don't like. So that's something I appreciated quite a lot. Another risk, I think, along this lines is you mentioned the getting started piece. And I think your team had maybe spent some time before we met trying to get started, and then that's around the time that we got pulled in. So talk to me a little bit around the difficulty or friction in getting started.
Yeah, these sort of projects are episodic within an organization. And when you're, smaller like we are with a 15-person staff, we just hadn't had anyone who had really done this before. So how to get started, because truly we thought price was the fix last time, right? To your point, if we bought the most expensive platform, surely then we'd be able to just tweak it to meet our needs. Um, so I just didn't have anyone who had been through a process or done a migration like this to help us understand all the pre-work that could be done to get everyone on the same page. Um, it was we were starting at, well, let's go source vendors, hear what they have to say, and then figure out which one's right as compared to what we have right now. I've now realized that's, well down the path of a much longer process that starts earlier. And, you're talking about something that is going to cost the foundation money, that's going to be a big lift of people's time to make this migration. Like the stakes of it feel really high. And so it can be, I think it was a little bit paralyzing for some of us to like figure out how to get started, because I think there was a bit of fear of like, we don't actually know how to do this really well. And once we get started, we're started, and we're trying to make this sort of project not feel painful and energy depleting for staff, which they often can. And we're just having a hard time getting off of square one.
Yeah, and I think in your case, you had multiple departments, multiple executive stakeholders that had differing maybe opinions, and oftentimes that's also like makes it harder to make progress because you're not necessarily speaking the same language. So I do very much appreciate that you also got, going into the workshop, you got started by reminding everyone where the organization wants to be 10 years down the line, how technology plays that part, and how each of those folks are going to play a part, and how technology is going to enable them. And that sort of, it's, I commend you and your team. It's oftentimes not easy to kind of do that apples to oranges prioritization, where one of your departments wants something and then the other one maybe. The fact is, it's more important as part of like whether you're short term or long term than the highest priority within a department. And I think having everyone come together and hear your perspective on it also kind of realigned where they fit and the ultimate mission in terms of who you serve and how you really make change. And that was very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, this project is change management within change management that we've
Yeah.
experienced at the Children's Foundation over the last 3 years. I think that, and you helped me with some messages that you've seen delivered at the outset of this. So that first day that we sat in the room, I talked about what it would feel like to have a system that really worked for us, and tried to get people to see where can we be 1 to 2 years from now? How will that enable us to get where we've very clearly, I think, all become aligned on where we want to be 10 years from now? And then acknowledging that there was going to be a path to walk to get there. And here's where we were on that journey, right? We were at this step, but they could see, like, oh, vendor selection was a few steps from now. So, like, there is going to be a path. We are walking it. Here's where we are. Let me get you feeling kind of how great it's going to be on the other end of this. I think, like, rationally, logically, everyone understood why we had to do this. But then you're trying to then appeal to people's emotions and get them bought into this and feeling good about this. And I think that's why having multiple people at different levels and different departments of the organization involved in this got folks feeling bought in, and motivated personally to be a part of getting us to, walking this path and getting us to this place that they knew we could get longer term. Because it's no one's job here full time to work on a tech migration, but now everyone is going to have to make the time to do it. If they know where we're going, if they understand the rationale behind doing this, then part of my job is to, like, fire them up and keep them motivated about getting there.
Yeah.
And I think you helped a lot with that, like getting the folks around the table and like keeping them believing that we can get there.
And we were very intentional in how we designed that, right? We had individual work where folks had to ideate on their own, and it was just like that awkward silence in the room, where usually there's someone that's the gregarious person that just kind of fills the silence, but actually slows down progress. And we kind of made everyone spend time thinking, ideating, visioning, and then had them kind of duke it out and prioritize across each other. I'm curious to know what your perspective was in terms of that individual work, the group work, the prioritization, and how we went about it.
Yeah, my favorite, I mean, this was right away. You had us take out 2 different color sticky notes each, and on one we had to write, and help me out. It was like, ideally what we want out of our tech system. I mean, I'm not getting this quite right, but one was like, we have to have this, and one was, here are some nice to haves. And then we had to give the nice to haves to our neighbor, and they ripped those up. And I mean, that is so much of what you're navigating, especially emotionally, when you're talking about change. Is change comes with feelings of loss and letting go, and, well, what if we don't have this and things are going to be different? And, like, you oriented us to, like, that's going to be part of this. And got us, I don't know, just like in a place where that's just going to be part of this process in a fun, safer way. Like, let's just acknowledge it at the outset that there's going to be stuff we don't get. You're going to feel like, oh my gosh, my idea just got totally scrapped for the greater good. But you oriented us to that right from the jump. And I think I don't know, it was a good, like, team building warm up exercise that then I think endeared you to the rest of the group as well.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that perspective. And I think what you're referring to is, as we started to do the ideation in terms of what our goals are and what we want out of the system, it's really important that we prioritize and apply focus. And, oftentimes, like, something we think about in the product world is, one way to go 5 times as fast is do only 20% of the work. The hard part is picking which 20% of the work to do. And I think that group exercise is almost cathartic, where you're not the only one who's nice to haves are not going to happen. Is everyone in the room? But as long as you're applying that focus and making sure you're putting the stuff in the right bucket around which ones are the non-negotiables. And we started out probably with, I don't know, over 200 stickies, and we ended up with a short list that we could put into a rubric, which in our world, whether, in the technology side, we do something called test-driven development, where we write the tests for the code before we even write the code, so that when we want to check if the code does what we intended, we're not rationalizing later based on the code we wrote. We're going back to why we wrote the code in the first place. And, you can zoom that out. When Amanda and I go on a vacation, we try and ask ourselves what we want out of the vacation. And then when we look at our agendas, we have some kind of guiding light. So all the way kind of in a very non-technical, non-work sense too, and then a lot of areas in between. And I think this rubric was somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And I'm curious. I know it was a lot of work to put together, and I'm curious where you saw the value of having that evaluation criteria set up beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, you kept remarking, oh, this is the session. This is the part of it that's going to get really heated and contentious, right? And there were some items to talk through, and getting on the same page between our grant making team and our finance team and our development or fundraising team. But I don't think it ever got as heated as you've maybe seen in other situations where like departments were really like, there was a lot of alignment, I think. That said, we did have to iron out some wrinkles. But going from sticky notes to eventually a rubric that then led to an RFP, it just made then when we got proposals back, we had an RFP, we had a rubric, but sometimes when you're seeing a rubric and that's the first thing you're seeing and you're being asked to rate something, I think you're losing value when you don't know everything that went into even building that rubric in the first place. Mm-hmm. So it was really easy for folks to then assess the proposals, score them against the rubric. And, two vendors very clearly rose to the top. And the one that we've picked, there was unanimous agreement that this was the right one. And folks could articulate to us really granular level, like why that one over the other finalists that we were considering. And that was really cool to see, just that how in it people were, about having never, we don't even have the platform yet, but their understanding of what this can and can't do for us, this early on in the project is great.
Why the braids? Maybe they look cute, but really, it's because I'm finally getting a haircut. I'm donating this hair to Crowns of Courage, an incredible group that makes wigs for kids going through cancer. I know how much hair can be such a big part of making someone feel confident and more like themselves. And this is a way that we can help a child feel like that, especially during such a hard time. On top of that, I'm also matching donations to the Children's Foundation here in Michigan. The foundation funds health and wellness programs for kids in underserved communities, and I've gotten to see firsthand how thoughtful and impactful their work is. This is where you folks in my community can help. If you donate, whether it's a 20, 50, whatever feels right, I'm going to match it. So your gift is going to go twice as far. Whether it's because cancer has touched your life, or you find meaning in helping kids feel whole again, here's an opportunity to double that impact. Thank you so much for your support here.
So we are kind of in the final stages of moving into implementation now. So I'd love to have you back in a few months, once the system's all fired up, and see how this all kind of worked, kind of overall. But as far as the mini steps go, what are some of the outcomes you'd say so far?
Yeah, one, like high staff morale heading into what will be the hardest part of this, which is actually moving over our system. But I think people are coming in feeling as good as they can heading into a project that is certain to get hard as we actually start to move things over. So I'm feeling really good about that. As we got in it with the staff and started to prioritize, I don't know that I ever said this out loud, but in my head, as the team was dreaming up and getting excited about the tech that was going to help them do their work better and have this foundation be more efficient and more impactful, in my head, I was thinking, I almost don't care what the cost is. Like we're getting that platform because that's going to make everyone's work so much better here. The pleasant surprise in all this is that we feel like we've chosen a vendor that is getting us, um, you know, most, if not all, of what we're looking for, and it's about 60% of the cost of what we're currently paying for our vendor. So it's always a bonus. But I was at a point where, so long as it wasn't exorbitantly more expensive, I wanted to get my team that tech that they wanted. Nice though that there's the savings. And then two other things that you really helped crystallize for me. One was every single tech company is going to have their person that's helping you with the migration, but they work for their company. And I felt like you helped me understand the value of having an agent on our side. And so we did a separate sort of rubric and RFP for who that person was. And you helped us find Janelle, who's now joined our team for the next year as the advocate on our side, and now our in-house technologist, right? Like we have our technologist who's going to help with this and then probably help us build out a couple of other things over the course of the next 10 to 12 months. So I'm feeling really good about that. And then both you and Janelle, the way you've talked about how this will go now over the next, 8 months or so as we make this migration, is that what we're trying to avoid is the big bang. And I actually remember it was, maybe 10 years ago now, I was a part of a CRM migration from one big platform to the other. And I actually remember everything built up to this Friday where the whole system shut down and then it was going to reopen on Monday and we're all going to be locked out of the system for these couple of days while the migration happened. And when we all fired our system up on Monday, this was out of place. This was wrong. This was incorrect. This name was like, this didn't move over. And it just created this sense of stress. That's the big bang that we're trying to avoid and that you've helped us understand, that we want to like thin slice this and bring things over when we can, test them, get them feeling right, so that by the time we get to, our current contract up and the new one starting over or taking hold, like it's not an on off switch. We're literally moving the like rheostat down that final tiny degree to turn off the lights. And we got to do that, and Janelle's going to help us do that. But I get that philosophically, and I think that helps people feel good about this too. That this isn't going to be one big move over and then a bunch of cleanup to do. That if we do this right, we can pace it out and make it feel manageable.
And I think it's really helpful to get that philosophical alignment in early. And we had a few different examples and metaphors and stuff to kind of paint that picture. And then we were able to kind of put that out to the vendors as well and make sure that they were on board with this process. And I think that also kind of gave us a lot of confidence in terms of picking the right ones, where the vendor is usually having to convince their clients of this, just like, we were convincing you. And the fact that they didn't have to convince anyone was kind of a mutual thumbs up there, which I feel optimistic about in terms of the rollout. And I think it'll be a huge win if 10 years from now, if none of the staff can remember what day of the week we turned off the current system.
Right.
And I'm curious, I heard some rumors that your team's going to get some more mileage out of the sticky notes, even outside of the tech eval and the CRM stuff.
I think the process that you walked us through is just a process that could be applied to any big decision you're making. Like, how do you de-risk a big decision? How do you make sure you are There is alignment on what you're trying to do, prioritization amongst a landscape of choices, and a filter through which to evaluate your options. So we're about to post for a couple of big hires. These job postings are going to go up in September. This is going to be half of my leadership team, like 2 of our vice president roles. I think to your point earlier, like we can just have a job description, but if we actually move back a couple of steps and do the sticky note exercise about what we really need out of these roles and have that then lead into a job description, which then leads into a series of questions and some form of a rubric to evaluate candidates, that's actually the better process to follow for a hire, which has nothing to do with technology, but it's how do you get clarity and de-risk a major decision you're trying to make. So we've applied it now to our hiring practices.
Awesome. And that's also, I will vouch certainly for those 2 hires. If anyone's listening and interested, this is a super fun organization to be part of with awesome mission and a high level of staff engagement. It's something I'm really curious about because when you told me about the role and that you were brought in maybe in like a turnaround capacity, usually that kind of, I'm like, of course they brought in some kind of lawyer to do turnaround here and he's going to be the hatchet man. And I wasn't necessarily, I was pretty surprised the first time I walked in and I saw the level of engagement from your staff. And I maybe like brought more armor in our toolkit than we needed. So before we get into that, actually, maybe I'd love to hear how you came to the organization. Tell us a little bit more about the organization itself. And then I want to dig into how you're able to maintain this culture despite kind of being in this turnaround paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, the Children's Foundation, we wake up every day thinking about the health and well-being of kids in Michigan. We are a grant-making and fundraising organization. Our history goes back to when Children's Hospital in Michigan sold in 2011. We inherited all the philanthropic money that had been given to the hospital going back to 1886. So we use that money, we've raised more money, and what we do is we make grants out to organizations in the community that are making an impact on kids. So that's our core business. When I started a couple years ago, yeah, I mean, it was a realignment in a few different ways. We had a staff structure. I mean, we had a vision of doing all sorts of things in all sorts of places that probably needed some refinement. And then when you're not clear on the vision, it's hard to then align the operations accordingly. So we had 35 staff members and 17 of them reported to me when I stepped into this role. So I knew that there was some work to be done on, what are we trying to be, and do we have the operations aligned to becoming that? And I was clear with the staff, like, I'm coming in, I'm learning. I wasn't hired from within, so I need some time to figure out like what that vision is. And as I get my feet under me, my goal is to understand what everybody's doing, understand this organization, and really trying to build trust with all of our stakeholders. Trust that, yeah, we were going to walk a journey of change, but that I was going to be really clear on the rational reasons why to appeal to people's heads, right? Like 17 direct reports isn't workable for me as a leader, right? And I think everyone could agree with why I felt that way and why that would need to change. So, being really logical and rational, and that's the lawyer part in me. I think that helps. But also, attending to the emotional aspect of, hey, we are going to walk a path of change. That's going to be hard. I'm not going to make big decisions without making sure I'm getting that maximum input and maximum unity. I'm going to take my time. And so, I could show you a roadmap that Brian and I built that mapped out the change management process. And it wasn't until, step 8 or 9 that it talked about, assessing the staff structure and making sure that our staff was aligned to a mission and a vision and a 10-year goal that we had to get clear on first. So folks knew like we were progressing towards a point in time where we were going to have to make some decisions about, do we have the right staff structure in place? And that came about 10 months in. And, my belief, having done this now in a few different roles, is if you're going to restructure the staff, try to do it to the extent possible once, even if that means bigger and deeper in one swoop. And so, we did that. And over the course of a couple of days, took the staff from that 35 down to, it was about 13 at the time. We've filled some positions. And that's really hard. But what I'll say is, the folks who moved on from the foundation, nobody in those conversations told me they were surprised. Like they all sort of got it. It didn't mean it was easy, but they all got it. Because they understood, hey, we're trying to align ourselves to this bigger vision of what we want to be. It's unworkable to have to give the CEO 17 direct reports. Doesn't mean it's not hard, but it makes the emotional part a little easier. Then for me, it was about rebuilding trust, right? Like, how do I then have the folks who are here understanding that it's hard for them knowing that colleagues that they worked with aren't here anymore? Like rebuild that trust. So we were super intentional about that for the next couple of months after that big staff change. And then since then, we've gotten a series of, had some success that has allowed us to feel like we're a more impactful organization that's driving towards a bigger vision of where we want to be over the next 3, 5, 10, 50 years. And I think folks are now starting to see the fruits of all of that difficult change. Doesn't mean, you never can take for granted the trust you're trying to build with your team, our donors, our board, the community. That I look at my job every single day is upholding and building that community trust for what the Children's Foundation role is in this community and why we deserve to exist here. But I think my staff is feeling it in a positive way.
I think there's a lot of elements that are really admirable about that, right? You took a very humble, curious approach. You were kind and clear with folks in terms of what was rational, building that vision together. And I think it was Jack Welch, I remember hearing back in the day, was very similar and candid, clear around his expectations. And there were people who would thank him even when they were let go because it wasn't a surprise. They kind of understood the building blocks behind all of this. And I think this is, it's a hard thing to do. I don't want to take away from that. And I think the hardness of it also creates a set of fear-driven assumptions that makes us avoid it, and then ends up being, we're not as clear anymore because we're not clear with ourselves, and just a whole other set of challenges that come with it. So I'm curious, you in many ways inherited a Jenga puzzle that someone else had built, and you had to figure out what was cosmetic, what was structural, and everything else in terms of building it into something bigger. This is going on with a number of leaders today, both in the not-for-profit and for-profit sectors. What advice do you have for them? And maybe you mentioned a 7-8 step process. I'd love to hear any of those that you remember too, around taking an organization over and going through that valley of despair where now you're really enjoying the fruits of those hard decisions and the tough conversations that you were part of.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot I could say. I think one is acknowledging upfront what sort of situation you're walking into, right? Like, and you really ought to know that before you've taken the job. Like, if you walk into what you think is something, a scalable entity, for-profit, nonprofit, whatever, come to find out it's more realignment to turnaround, you've screwed up somehow in sussing out the opportunity in the interview
Yeah.
process. So just clarity on knowing what you're walking into. I think there's a big difference between the coming up through an organization and now in a leadership role where you're trying to work change versus coming in to an organization from the outside. Like I've done both now. And I now hold myself to a different standard and a different timeline when you're coming from the outside in. Like as a leader, people say like the first question you get when you start in a new role as a CEO is what's your vision? I just don't think you have it until you've like, unless you have worked in the organization and you've thought about this and know how it operates. Like that's a really hard question to answer. With
And so
authentic.
very tactically, I imagine you got asked that when you were doing
Oh
the
yeah.
one-on-ones. What'd you say? Did you say, I don't know? Or like, what's the,
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to build trust with everyone, so I didn't want to overpromise, right? Like it was,
Mhm.
here's kind of my instinct, here's what I'm thinking. I'm not sure. I'm testing that by listening and open to, you know, feedback and changing the contours of this. Like it was more vague. I was operating more on instinct and a little less clear in, you know, what 10 years looked like from now. But honest with people that that was coming to clarity for me. And I was holding myself a little arbitrarily to like year one, do this, year two, do this. And by year three, we'd be here. I'm finishing up year three and I am super happy with traction and progress and the trajectory that we're on. Um, uh, but things also have to happen in their own time because it really took me. I thought I'd probably have that vision crystallized within 6 months. It probably took more like 12 to 18 months, but not pushing it just for the sake of being able to say, oh, I'm 6 months in and I've got the vision, but like letting things marinate and come to fruition on their own time, I think has led me to a place where like I'm so clear on what I want the Children's Foundation to be in this community for the next 50 years, that now I can take that to my team and say, let's go. And I think that's leading to excitement.
you mentioned kind of the restructuring was not kind of the first thing you go in and do. It was step 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming forming the opinion of the vision is somewhere in the first 30%. So I'm curious, like if it's not linear, obviously, but if you had to kind of think about it linearly, what are some of the things before that you're really thankful you did, or you would certainly do next time?
Yeah. I mean, first thing we did, and there's a lot of variables that go into these sort of decisions. Like we had a little bit of time, right? The lights weren't shutting off here tomorrow. So I knew I probably had at least, you know, a year or so. But the first thing we did was we got the board together and we rewrote the mission and the vision of the organization. You know, that's your 50,000 foot and then maybe to 30,000 foot direction. What ultimately, aspirationally, is this place? And we workshop that with the board. We also involve the staff in helping us rewrite our mission and vision. Then we took that and said, all right, we crafted what we call our intended impact. And the prong for that is over the next 10 years, we hope that our work will yield this, this, and this. And we articulated what those 3 things are. And we did that with the staff deeply involved. Then we got to the question of, all right, if aspirationally this is what we want to be as stated through our mission and vision, if over the next 10 years we want to do these 3 things, you know, what then do we have to be doing over the next 1, 3, and 5 years? And how do we have to be set up operationally to accomplish that? All of that is, you know, what then led to 10 months in restructuring of the Jenga tower in terms of people. I had a good friend who took a different job right around the same time I took this job, who also, you know, walked into a staffing structure that she didn't feel like worked for her. And we were talking over the first couple of months, and she took a very different approach where she made it very clear from the beginning, this staff structure doesn't work. She was quick to let some folks go that, in her opinion, just absolutely weren't the right fit. What then ended up happening 6 months in is some of the people that she really saw as part of her longer term team left on their own because they were afraid they were going to be next. And it's almost the opposite of what we're doing in the tech space, right? Like the drip faucet of letting people go, you end up scaring the crap out of people and you lose people out of their own fear that you actually don't want to. So that, that gets back to these sort of changes are hard, but to the extent that you can, do things as deep as you need to and once, that's I think the better approach.
As we wrap up, a couple of things that I love to hear from our guests. At the end of the day, this is a show about fostering engaged teams who ship delightful products. So I'm curious, when you think about a team, when you think about energizing a team or leading a team, is there like an entity of a team that you think about that's been like your favorite team or something that you use as a source of inspiration?
I've been fortunate to be a part of a couple of dream teams in my life and my career, like a couple of sports teams I was on and a couple of work teams where, you just get to that point where you're like, we can do anything we want as a team. I really started exploring this a couple of years ago with other leaders and asking, when in your career did you feel like you had your dream team? And I actually heard, well, from some I heard never, right? And I sort of put those over in one category. I usually heard one of two answers. Either someone could say, oh, this team, these years, these people, with a lot of enthusiasm and passion. And then I heard from a smaller group of people, this time, then this time, then this time, then this time. And I looked at those people, and those are the folks that I asked more questions and wanted to understand, because I think I realized a sign of a great leader is you're building that dream team over and over again in your career. And you don't always have that team because organizations evolve, people move on to different opportunities. And sometimes that means outside of, the organization or team that you're working with them. But that you try over and over again to get back to that point of, I've got the people around me that feel like we can do anything. And I've got these two positions that we're going to hire for, we're going to walk this map or walk this path of some change. I'm so clear on what that feeling's going to be a year from now when I get the right two people to round out that team, because I finally feel like that's my opportunity to have my dream team in this role for a run, right? And then if someone moves on, something changes, we'll rebuild it again. But to me, I'd look back on my career and I'd feel like, wow, I've done that now a few times. And that differentiates me in a way that motivates me from the folks who felt like, oh, I had that once and I never got it back. And I think that's a big difference between, good leaders and great leaders on how they think about teams.
There's this adage around the importance of consistency over intensity. And this feels like in the realm of that, where it's not a set it and forget it, this kind of magnum opus kind of thing. It's something that you're constantly building and evolving, and change is part of it. Even if your team doesn't change, everything around is changing. So it's going to force change, and we need to adapt that way. So I think that mindset really has you looking in a very different way than hoping that things don't change. And I think that's also very profound. Switching gears, in terms of products or services, is there something recently that totally blew your socks off, that delighted you recently, that you unboxed or you got to experience?
This would be just a non-paid shameless plug for this Remarkable that I recently got. I'm a note taker. I used to use notebooks, Moleskine, sticky notes, right? And over a period of a couple of months, I had 3 different people look at my system, hold up their Remarkable and say, you should really look at this. And so it's been super helpful to me the last couple of months. It's pretty user-friendly on the tech side, right? It's not... It kind of is what it is. It doesn't try to be a million different things at once, which, these devices do. But for me, it's working so well because it's one thing I can carry around. I used to misplace notebooks. I'd pick up one, whatever was around. I'd have sticky notes stuck to my laptop that had, things that I were like really important that I do, and like the adhesive would wear out. This thing's been cool, and I like the look of it. It feels sleek, so it's been a fun piece of tech to add. Just in the
And I
last
think there's also just something that they've done really well around like the super paper-like feel. And it
Yeah.
makes me feel like a kid when I used to like spend a lot of time like drawing pencil to paper kind of thing. And that tactile feedback, I think, is also a big part of why it's just so engaging to come back to.
My notes I don't take notes linearly. Like if you look at my pads, it's arrows and this and that. So someone said, "Oh, do you use the function where then it turns it into text?" Like we're still decades away from the AI that's going to decipher my chicken scratch and make sense of it. Yet I look at it and I get it.
I think I'm similar to you in that when I use my Remarkable, I also would use the zoom in and zoom out feature because that chicken scratch is part of like another chicken scratch. And now with the zoom out, I can kind of put it all in one playing field and know where I want to go in and go out of. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for making time. Another thing I'd love to know is if folks want to get a hold of yourself or check out the Children's Foundation, what are the best ways for folks to reach out and how's the best way for folks to learn about the foundation?
Yeah, it's yourchildrensfoundation.org. That's our website. We're going to be rolling out a new website in the next couple of months. Again, aligning a piece of our operations to who we're becoming and who we want to be. So yourchildrensfoundation.org. And then, if you care about kids in Michigan, reach out to me. I spend my days getting to know as many people in this community and helping them understand what the Children's Foundation is all about. And if you're interested in getting a cup of coffee and learning more, I would love to talk to you.
And is LinkedIn probably a good way for folks to reach out?
Yeah, LinkedIn messages I'm pretty good at responding to. My email's on the website. You can reach out that way. But I'm actually pretty good at staying on top of my LinkedIn messages. So Andrew Stein on LinkedIn, find me.
Cool. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes too. Thanks a lot for making time, man. I've had so much fun working with your team and with yourself, and it's great that we get to talk about and reflect on it. Hope you have an awesome day.
Thank you, Ashok. You too.
We hope you enjoyed that episode with Andrew Stein from the Children's Foundation. I've personally found time with Andrew to always be very energizing and oftentimes also inspirational. I love on the episode how he talked about taking such a humble and curious approach to learning about the organization as part of his transformational efforts. How he didn't pretend like he knew more than he did. I think it's human nature to avoid saying, "I don't know." And I believe it's very counterintuitive how avoiding that tends to erode trust more than helping you earn it. I also appreciate how he took such a methodical approach to challenging steps like organizational restructuring rather than a spray and pray approach. That discipline, his leadership, and philosophy made our lives as product facilitators way easier. And the proof is certainly in the pudding. It was a pleasure to work with the Children's Foundation team, largely because of how engaged and energized the team was, despite our pushing them really hard to make difficult decisions amidst challenging trade-offs. If you're curious about a similar workshop to help de-risk a big decision that you're making at your organization, hit us up either DM on socials or on our contact page on convergence.fm. We will see you next week with another episode about fostering engaged teams who ship delightful products. See you then.
Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.